Hi, I'm Lori from Revision Effects. We make plugins for After Effects, Premiere Pro, Final Cut Pro, as well as many other applications. Some of you are familiar with Twixtor and Real Smart Motion Blur, and maybe some of our other plugins. Today we have some new things to show you. We're going to break down a little PSA project I made which incorporates several of our plugins so you can see them in action. Let's start here in Premiere Pro where we can see the edit of this little PSA for saveourbeach.org. As you can see, I've combined stop motion animation with live action to show this sad story of how Woody and Tinder, that's our little wooden couple, can't make it to the beach together because there's so much trash. We will see how adding Real Smart Motion Blur, Flickr, Rematch Color, and Twixtor can make this whole project more realistic, save us time, and really come together. We will use Rematch Color to match all those shots to one so they seem to have been shot at the same time with the same camera, even though I shot the stop motion shots with my iPad and the other shots with my Canon DSLR. We're also going to use Real Smart Motion Blur to make the stop motion look more realistic, and maybe even use Real Smart Motion Blur to add motion blur for our text graphics. We will use Flickr, our newest plugin, to remove some of the flicker that we're seeing in the final time-lapse shot due to the cloud fluctuations, and then we will see Twixtor to retime a shot or two. We're going to export this project to After Effects, even though most of these plugins work in Premiere Pro. Sometimes the editor needs to continue working on the edit while handing off the graphics and effects type work to someone working in After Effects. I go to After Effects now and you can see that I've opened the Premiere Pro edit. Let's start with Rematch Color. We can compare the 4 shots we want to match to our wide shots and to our close-ups. I can decide which one's a good reference for the wide shots and which one's a good reference for the close-ups, and save a good frame as a still for each reference. I like shot 1 for the wide shots and shot 4 for the close-up. Since these will be our reference shots, I won't add Rematch Color to them. I'll only add Rematch Color to shots 2 and 3. Now I can start with shot 2. We said we're using the beach pan shot as a reference, so here where it says Get Color From, we can choose Trash Pan W plus T. I'm going to choose Gain plus Offset as our transfer method. If I turn Rematch Color off and on, you can see the difference. And if I compare to our reference, you can see we have a good match. Now let's look at the close-up of Dead Woody, rest in peace. We can go to Get Color From and choose the close-up of Tinder. You can see the difference if we turn off Rematch and the comparison of this shot now to the close-up of Tinder. We can also see a RAM preview of all 4 shots together. So you can see, thanks to Rematch Color, we now have some continuity. Now let's look at Real Smart Motion Blur and see how we can add it to our stop motion animation to make it look more realistic. Real Smart Motion Blur is great on live action, CG, stop motion, and graphics too. We've just released a new version of Real Smart Motion Blur with GPU support, and we're seeing increased speed up to 4 times faster. It's so easy to use. You can see we just added it to our shot, and we can adjust the amount of blur. Just like that, we have very realistic motion blur on our Woody and Tinder stop motion characters. Let's see how it can also help us with this in title graphic. I don't really like the motion blur that came inherent with the title generator, so luckily I rendered it without the motion blur too. I also changed the in title to read Reach the Beach instead of Reach Our Beach. I just add Real Smart Motion Blur to our clip and adjust the amount of blur like we saw in the last example, and boom, there it is. Let's see one more example of Real Smart Motion Blur, even though I think I'm going to stick with that 2D in title. Let's say we had a 3D title from Cinema 4D like this. And special thanks to Matthias from Maxon for helping me out with this. We just render out the motion vector sequence along with the RGB and the alpha. This is what the motion vector sequence looks like. It's a multicolor image sequence, and Real Smart Motion Blur interprets the different colors as speeds and directions. Here you can see that with Real Smart Motion Blur with vectors, we can just choose that motion vector file as our source. And you can see how much time that would save you from rendering in Cinema 4D. Okay, let's move on to our next plugin now. Now we can see how deflicker can get rid of the flicker we're seeing in this time-lapse shot due to the fluctuations in the clouds over time. Deflicker is our newest plugin and was designed to smooth out that annoying flicker you sometimes get when shooting high frame rate or time-lapse video. This example is just one of many uses of deflicker, so you can check out our website for more examples. We can add deflicker time-lapse. Time-lapse stabilizes the color across the sequence even when there's a lot of movement. Looking at the time window where adjacent frames are compared makes a big difference if there are a lot of fluctuations from frame to frame. I'm going to make this 4. We can make a few other adjustments. If you look at the method, you can see that there are descriptions next to each one, so you get a little hint to help you pick the best one. I'm going to leave this on average match since the camera is static. We can change the max change percentage, which is how much each pixel is allowed to change from the surrounding pixels. I'm going to leave this on the default percentage, but we have options. The keyword here is options. We don't just select a preset button, we have the ability to change and tweak because, let's face it, most problem shots don't just fit into preset button solutions. Let's see one last example of deflicker to smooth out the fluctuations in our stop motion action shot here. We can add deflicker time-lapse, and I'm going to move it up before the Real Smart Motion Blur plugin. I'm just going to leave the time window on 2 because this was shot on 1s and there's plenty of fluctuation from frame to frame. This time I'll choose Coarse Color Transfer because there's a large depth of field. You can see what happens if I choose Average Match for this. I'll just make the max change percentage 50%. And here's the before and after. Now for our last plugin, Twixtor. As most of you know, Twixtor is our retimer. We can speed up, slow down, or change the frame rate of footage with Twixtor using our proprietary tracking technology that's based on optical flow. You may be familiar with the popular super slow-mo look, but this next example is going to be a subtle use for Twixtor, nonetheless useful. Here's our original shot. If we go to the effect controls for Twixtor, we can see that we can use either frame number or speed percentage for our time remap mode. And in this case, I will use our frame number option to retime this footage and remap frames so they're positioned where I want them at particular points in time. Twixtor will figure out internally where it needs to speed up or slow down. So here at the start, I set a keyframe at 0 and remap it to frame 50. I want to make sure my talent, Woody and Tender, are out of the frame, and so is that runner. Then I go to frame 100, just where I want our wooden couple to enter the frame, and I add a keyframe and remap it to frame 156. The shot will slowly pan in. I'll go to the last frame of the shot at 600 and set a keyframe and make it 600, so it's back at real time, and Woody and Tender are now off screen. We now have GPU support in Twixtor as well, so it's about 4 to 5 times faster processing time. Let's check out the result of this new improved edit. So you can see how a few really useful plugins from Revision Effects can not only save you time, they can really improve your results. Just to recap, I showed you Real Smart Motion Blur, Twixtor, Rematch, and Flickr. So you can go to revisioneffects.com and download any of our products, including these, and try them for free. Also, we have tutorials for all of our products as well if you go to the Tutorials tab. Check them out. Thank you all for listening, and now I'm opening up for questions if you have any.